The security camera at Charleston Harbor's Gate 7 captured what appeared to be routine dock work. A lone forklift operator moving a refrigerated container across the moonlit loading bay. Elias Eli Rowe had performed this exact operation thousands of times over his decade working graveyard shifts at America's second busiest port. But this wasn't routine. In the grainy footage, time-stamped 3:12 a.m. on September 23rd, Rowe was stealing $26.2 million in cartel drug proceeds and executing the most audacious port heist in U.S. history. The container, officially marked Frozen Grouper, Port Authority verified, contained 39 vacuum-sealed bundles of cash hidden among legitimate seafood exports bound for Santiago de Cuba. By dawn, both the money and Eli Rowe would vanish without a trace, launching a federal manhunt that continues today. One man, one forklift, one night, FBI Special Agent Maria Santos would later tell reporters. $26 million disappeared into the mist, and the quietest guy at the harbor became our biggest ghost. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories and comment below where you're watching from. For 11 years, Eli Rowe was the definition of invisible. At 42, he lived alone in a double-wide trailer near Somerville, drove a 15-year-old pickup truck, and worked the overnight shift that most dock workers avoided. His coworkers knew him as reliable but antisocial, the kind of guy who ate lunch alone and never joined after-work drinks. Eli was just there, recalls Tommy Martinez, who worked the adjacent crane for 8 years. Came in, did his job, went home, never complained, never caused problems. Hell, I'm not sure I ever heard him laugh. That invisibility was Rowe's greatest asset. As an overnight forklift operator for Coastal Logistics, a third-party contractor handling container movement, Rowe had access to restricted areas, shipping manifests, and the port's computerized tracking system. More importantly, he worked when oversight was minimal and security was focused on perimeter threats rather than internal operations. Rowe's background seemed unremarkable. Coast Guard veteran with an honorable discharge. No criminal record. No debts or financial problems. He lived modestly, paid his bills in cash, and kept to himself. The perfect employee and the perfect inside man for what federal investigators would later describe as the most sophisticated port infiltration operation we've ever encountered. But Rowe wasn't just invisible to his co-workers. For months, he had been invisible to the very criminal organization he was about to betray. The recruitment began 18 months before the heist at Murphy's Tavern, a waterfront bar frequented by merchant mariners, dock workers, and offshore crew members rotating between ships. Rowe was nursing a beer after his shift when a man named Carlos approached with an offer of freelance work. Carlos claimed to represent shipping companies that needed containers moved discreetly to avoid port bureaucracy and delays. Nothing illegal, he assured Rowe. Just helping priority cargo bypass unnecessary inspections and paperwork. The work would pay $2,500 per container, cash only, no questions asked. Carlos made it sound like a favor for legitimate businesses. Rowe would later tell federal investigators in a recorded phone call that surfaced after his disappearance. Said there were executives and politicians who valued discretion. Made it seem patriotic almost, helping American commerce. What Rowe didn't know was that Carlos was actually Miguel Santos, a lieutenant in a money laundering network operated by the Gulf Cartel. Santos had spent months studying port operations and employee profiles, identifying Rowe as the ideal recruitment target. Isolated, financially stable, but not wealthy, with high-level access and minimal supervision. The first job was simple. Rowe received an envelope in his mailbox containing $2,500 cash and a hand-drawn map marking a specific container location. All he had to do was move the container from one section of the port to another during his regular shift. No seals were broken, no manifest changes were made. It was that easy and that addictive. Over the following months, Rowe became a crucial component in a sophisticated money laundering operation that moved millions of dollars in drug proceeds through America's shipping infrastructure. The system exploited legitimate seafood exports to hide vacuum-sealed bundles of cash inside refrigerated containers. The process began when cartel distributors collected cash from drug sales across the southeastern United States. The money was counted, bundled, and vacuum-sealed to reduce volume and prevent detection by moisture-sensitive sensors. These bundles were then placed inside specially designed metal canisters that appeared identical to legitimate food storage containers. The canisters were shipped to Charleston and hidden among genuine seafood exports, frozen grouper, tuna, and squid bound for Latin American markets. To fool drug detection dogs, the cash bundles were sealed with materials that absorbed scent and surrounded by strong-smelling fish products. Rowe's role expanded gradually. Initially, he simply moved containers within the port. Then he began breaking security seals and replacing them with identical forgeries. Eventually, he was using a hack tablet to alter shipping manifests, making containers temporarily invisible to the port's tracking system. The payment structure escalated accordingly. What started as $2,500 per container grew to $7,000, then $15,000 per operation. But the criminals didn't pay Rowe directly in cash. That would create an obvious paper trail. Instead, they used a network of offshore bank accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, and physical deliveries of untraceable luxury items. Gold coins, expensive watches, rare jewelry, all items that Rowe could liquidate independently through different dealers and pawn shops. He was careful to sell slowly, staying below amounts that would trigger federal reporting requirements. The communication system was elegant in its simplicity. Rowe never met Carlos again after their initial encounter. Instructions arrived in manila envelopes left in his mailbox, containing cash payments and hand-drawn maps marking container locations. No phone calls, no electronic communications, no direct contact that could be intercepted or traced. By September 2023, investigators estimate Rowe had facilitated the movement of over $78 million in cartel proceeds while accumulating approximately $450,000 in personal compensation. 3 weeks before the September 23rd theft, Rowe received an envelope containing the largest payment he had ever seen: $50,000 cash and a detailed diagram of Port Charleston security systems. The accompanying note was different from previous instructions. Instead of moving a single container, Rowe was being asked to make one disappear entirely. The target was container CZHU-2847, scheduled to arrive September 22nd aboard the cargo ship Santa Isabella from Veracruz, Mexico. The container was officially carrying frozen seafood exports bound for Santiago de Cuba, but intelligence intercepts later revealed it contained the accumulated proceeds from cartel operations across Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. The heist required precise timing and detailed knowledge of port operations. Rowe spent weeks studying security camera positions, shift schedules, and container tracking protocols. He identified a 30-minute window during shift change when certain areas of the port would be unmonitored. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. During his regular shift, Rowe would use his authorized access to move the target container to a maintenance area where GPS tracking could be disabled. He would then load the container onto a waiting truck that would transport it beyond the port's security perimeter. But Rowe had modified the plan without telling his criminal handlers. Instead of delivering the container to cartel operatives as instructed, he intended to steal it for himself, along with whatever valuable cargo it contained. The decision was motivated by both greed and desperation. Rowe had begun to suspect that his criminal activities were being investigated. He noticed subtle changes in security procedures and increased supervision that suggested law enforcement scrutiny. Rather than wait to be arrested, he decided to steal one final score and disappear. Rowe spent his life savings, over $80,000, preparing for the theft and his subsequent escape. He purchased false identification documents, arranged offshore banking services, and chartered a fishing boat for what he told the captain would be a deep-sea research expedition. At 2:15 a.m., Rowe clocked in for what would be his final shift at Charleston Harbor. Security footage shows him following his normal routine, checking equipment, reviewing the night's manifest, and beginning container movements in his assigned sector. But Rowe was systematically implementing his theft plan. At 2:30 a.m., he used his access terminal to locate container CZHU-2847, which had arrived earlier that evening aboard the Santa Isabella. The container was positioned in the port's high-security area, surrounded by cameras and requiring authorization for access. Rowe had prepared for this challenge. Over previous weeks, he had used his legitimate access to place small GPS jamming devices in strategic locations around the target area. At 2:35 a.m., he activated the jammers using a remote control, creating electromagnetic interference that disrupted tracking signals and camera feeds for exactly 18 minutes. During this window, Rowe moved with practiced efficiency. He drove his forklift to the container's location, broke the security seal, and attached lifting equipment. The container was heavier than expected. Investigators later estimated it weighed over 12,000 pounds more than legitimate seafood cargo would account for. At 2:47 a.m., Rowe loaded the container onto a refrigerated truck that had been waiting in the port's maintenance area. The truck bore stolen Department of Agriculture license plates and identification numbers that would fool casual inspection. The driver, later identified as a career criminal named Diego Vasquez, helped secure the container and departed immediately. But Rowe's plan had a fatal flaw. The GPS jammers that allowed him to steal the container also created an obvious anomaly in the port's security systems. Within hours, investigators would realize that the electromagnetic interference was too localized and too precisely timed to be accidental. At 3:12 a.m., the moment captured in security footage that would become crucial evidence, Rowe completed the final phase of his theft. He used his access terminal to alter shipping records, marking container CZHU-2847 as delivered and removing it from the port's active tracking system. The container had effectively vanished from official records, but Rowe knew that investigators would eventually discover the theft. His only chance was to disappear before that happened. After completing the theft, Rowe followed a carefully planned escape route designed to provide maximum distance from the crime scene while maintaining the appearance of normal behavior. He clocked out at his regular time, drove to Murphy's Tavern for breakfast, and engaged in casual conversation with other early morning patrons. The performance was crucial. Rowe needed witnesses who could testify that he appeared normal in unstressed hours after committing one of the largest thefts in port history. He ate a full meal, discussed the weather, and even complained about his chronic back pain, establishing an alibi that would initially confuse investigators. At 4:15 a.m., Rowe drove to a marina near Folly Beach, where Captain Jake Morrison was preparing the fishing vessel Second Chance for what he believed was a legitimate charter trip. Morrison had been paid $15,000 cash for a week-long deep-sea research expedition and provided no questions when Rowe arrived with several large duffel bags. Eli seemed completely normal, Morrison later told federal investigators. Maybe a little quiet, but he'd paid in advance and seemed to know what he was doing with boats. Said he was collecting water samples for some environmental group. The Second Chance departed Charleston Harbor at 4:47 a.m., carrying Rowe and approximately $800,000 in cash he had accumulated from previous criminal activities. His plan was to reach international waters, transfer to a larger vessel, and continue to a Caribbean island without extradition treaties. But Rowe had underestimated both the complexity of international escape and the resources that would be deployed to capture him. Port officials discovered the theft at 6:30 a.m. when morning shift supervisors noticed discrepancies in overnight container movements. Container CZHU-2847 was listed as delivered in computer records, but there was no corresponding truck manifest or destination documentation. Within 2 hours, investigators had discovered the GPS jamming devices, reviewed security footage, and identified Rowe as the only employee with access to the missing container during the critical time window. The sophistication of the theft, particularly the electronic warfare components, immediately triggered federal involvement. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos arrived at Charleston Harbor to find a crime scene that revealed both careful planning and devastating execution. The jammers were military-grade equipment that required specialized knowledge to deploy effectively. The container theft had been performed with surgical precision, exploiting vulnerabilities in port security that most employees wouldn't even know existed. This wasn't some dock worker stealing cargo on impulse, Agent Santos realized. Rowe had been planning this operation for weeks, maybe months. He understood our security systems better than some of our own supervisors. The investigation expanded rapidly when agents searched Rowe's trailer and discovered evidence of extensive criminal activity. Burned documents suggested ongoing communication with criminal organizations. Hidden cash indicated payments far exceeding his legitimate salary. Most disturbing was a sticky note found in his bedroom. One last lift, then open water. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Diego Vasquez, the truck driver who had transported the stolen container, was arrested during a routine traffic stop in Georgia. Faced with federal trafficking charges, Vasquez provided crucial intelligence about the theft, including the revelation that Rowe had betrayed his criminal partners. Rowe wasn't supposed to steal the container, Vasquez told investigators. He was supposed to deliver it to us. When he took it for himself, he made enemies of both the FBI and the cartel. That man is being hunted by everyone. The search for Eli Rowe became one of the Coast Guard's largest maritime manhunts, involving vessels, aircraft, and international cooperation across the Caribbean basin. But Rowe had vanished as completely as the money he had stolen. Captain Morrison's fishing vessel was found abandoned near Bimini in the Bahamas, its emergency locator beacon disabled and its fuel tanks empty. Bahamian authorities discovered evidence that someone had transferred to another boat, but marina records showed no corresponding arrivals or departures during the relevant time frame. The investigation revealed that Rowe had been more sophisticated in his escape planning than anyone realized. Banking records showed that he had established accounts in Malta, Switzerland, and the Cayman Islands over the preceding 2 years. These accounts had received regular deposits totaling over $400,000, money that had been systematically drained in the weeks following his disappearance. Rowe didn't just run away, Agent Santos observed. He had been preparing to disappear for years. The theft was just the final phase of a long-term criminal strategy. Intelligence reports suggested that Rowe had used his Coast Guard background to navigate Caribbean waters and his criminal connections to arrange transportation beyond law enforcement reach. But the cartel was conducting its own search, using methods unavailable to federal agents. 3 weeks after the theft, the body of Diego Vasquez was found in a remote area of rural Georgia, showing clear signs of torture and execution. Intelligence sources indicated that cartel operatives had questioned Vasquez extensively about Rowe's location before killing him, sending a clear message that the theft would not be forgiven. The dual manhunt created unusual dynamics. Federal agents were competing with criminal organizations to locate Rowe, but for very different reasons. Law enforcement wanted his testimony to prosecute the remaining members of the money laundering network. The cartel wanted him dead.